everybody. Today I'm driving an Aston Martin. It's always a good day when I can say that, but today's Aston is one I've been desperate to have a go of for a very long time. This is a Vanquish, the later one, which I must confess is always the one that I've been far more interested in. The early car, I know, is revered by many, but just never really appealed to me. It looks just a shade too old on the outside, and the interior of the early cars is, as far as I'm concerned, pretty unforgivable, being lifted almost entirely from the Jaguar parts bin. The later Vanquish had a pretty unenviable task though, because not only were they reviving that fabled nameplate, but also this car was a direct replacement for the legendary DBS, a car which had a starring role in not just a Bond movie, but a very good Bond movie. So coming up with its successor was never going to be an easy task. The Vanquish nameplate really bookends a key chapter in Aston Martin history, the VH architecture, which was actually derived from Lotus technology. Now I know that the Rapide is still in production, but seeing as nobody remembered that car when it was brand new, I think we can safely ignore it. The Vanquish then being, in the eyes of many, the last real Aston to use the VH platform. I think one of the problems that Aston had was that VH was a method, not an actual chassis, so everybody thought that this was the same car underneath as the DB9 from 10 years earlier. Yeah, sure, the materials and construction are very similar, but it isn't the same. And Aston made a lot of changes to the Vanquish to try and make it fairly up to date and decent. Up front we have an evolution of the very familiar 6-litre V12, or 5.9 as it probably should be properly called. It makes here 565 horsepower, with later cars getting just a little bit more. This 2014 model has the 8-speed automatic gearbox. That was a pretty major improvement for the Vanquish, because it slashed the 0 to 60 time from just over 4 seconds to about 3.6, and top speed leapt from 183 to over 200, making this, on paper at least, a seriously fast car. In truth, I always quite liked the old 6-speed. I thought it suited the Astons very well, but the 8 is just that little bit better. Currently driving it in automatic mode, and it is genuinely excellent. If you're used to a single clutch automated box like the one you'd find in a Vantage or perhaps the Ferrari 430 that I'm driving this week, it is vastly superior, and I think Aston made the right decision with their newer cars to stick with the regular 8-speed auto. I know a lot of people expect a dual clutch, but for me, in an Aston, I really don't see the benefit. That gearbox is at the back of the car, as is modern Aston tradition, and that means weight distribution is reasonably even. Weight is an interesting topic in this car though, because despite the fact that it is an entirely carbon fibre body, it's still pretty heavy. I mean, it's amazing and gorgeous to look at. You lift the bonnet or the boot and you're met with acres of the stuff, and you think that it's therefore going to be a real hardcore lightweight car, but it's just not. In fact, it weighs almost the same as my Ferrari 550, which is made out of steel and aluminium and no fancy construction methods at all. 1,750 kilos is about the weight for one of these cars. However, it does somewhat make up for it by being extremely luxurious. This is a wonderful place to be. Like all Astons, you feel like you're sat impossibly far away from the front of the car, and placing that corner is something of a nightmare. Every time I get in one of these, I think it's going to be a little bit easier, and I'm reminded that it's not. And this car's in a pretty classic specification with the nice grey paintwork, we're not sure what the colour actually is, and this interior which has a little dash of colour thanks to this sort of orangey stuff which is on the paddles, which is on the side here, and on the seats. Now the seats are the regular Aston Comfort ones, which I'm really not in love with. I do prefer bucket seats in these cars because I actually find them to be more comfortable and considerably more supportive. These don't really offer you any lateral support whatsoever, and it's something of an odd oversight. This car has the slightly squared off steering wheel in it too, which looks utterly bizarre but is actually quite nice to hold, and you've got a few controls on it, including importantly controls for the suspension and the power, which is currently set to normal and sport respectively. In its firmer setting, the suspension on this car is A little too stiff for daily driving, but not punishing. Not compared to, say, the old V8 Vantage S, or even the more recent V12 Vantage non-S. As a GT car, the Vanquish is a very good place to spend your time. The boot is usefully larger than the old DBS, which was, quite frankly, very stingy, although the back seats are still as useless as they ever were. With modern requirements on child seats, I think you'd struggle to even get the little ones in there. Now, there's an awful lot that I really do love about Aston and the brand. Just recently, a friend of mine has been looking to buy one, and he's received excellent service, courtesy of the very good people at Stratstone up in Wilmslow. And in fact, this car's owner also takes it back to a Stratstone dealership because he's very happy with the service he receives. And joyfully, this car has never needed anything beyond regular routine maintenance. The whole thing really does feel very nice. It's not creaking or rattling or anything of the sort, and it is genuinely a premium product in here. Just as well, because when these were new, they cost an absolute fortune. Very easy to specify your Vanquish to over £200,000 without a lot of effort. And when you consider that this car crossed over for a little bit of its life with the DB11, I think a lot of people found the Vanquish somewhat lost in the lineup. It was officially the top of the Aston tree if you wanted a proper front-engine GT car, but the DB11 in the real world was a lot newer, a lot fancier, more technology, and probably a lot quicker too, thanks to its twin-turbocharged V12. I have actually driven this car's replacement, the DBS, and I've got to say that's a car which left me very frustrated. It actually feels like a backward step on the interior front, although I do think that the modern DBS is the only one of the current Astons that really works on the outside. In these later cars, the infotainment here is actually reasonably nice to use and to look at. The display is sharp. The Bang & Olufsen stereo has the fancy little pop-out tweeters, and it's brilliant to listen to. Genuinely one of the better stereos you'll find in any car. And on the whole, this is, I think, everything you would expect from an Aston. Right down to the forward window switch controls, which they're still using even in this car. But honestly, you don't really notice or care when a car looks, sounds and goes quite this well. This car also has the third generation of the new interior, which began with the DB9 and then later V8 Vantage. It's pretty good looking, feels very modern, although it isn't actually the easiest to use because you've got a lot of these haptic buttons that you need to look at in order to operate, but the key ones, i.e. temperature and fan speed, are on physical rotary dials, which means that they are nice to use. That's important, and that's something that I'm starting to lose sight of with modern cars because too many of them have touch screens for that stuff, and that to me, it's just dangerous. That should always be a physical dial. I shouldn't need to take my eyes off the road to turn the volume on the stereo up or down, or to change the temperature of the cabin. Simple as that. Now, for those who haven't experienced the majesty of a big, old, naturally aspirated V12, I strongly suggest that you do as soon as possible before the government come along and take them all away from us in the dead of night. They are absolutely magnificent. Yes, I know that they drink. If you're looking at buying a car that does decent fuel economy, I don't think any Aston Martin is probably the right choice for you. But there is a flexibility to these engines which is absolutely magnificent. Yes, the Vanquish may have been some way short of their rivals from Modena in terms of outright power and fireworks, but believe me when I say that this V12 is still a magnificent thing and genuinely no slouch. So after a nice long day cruising home, you find yourself on the final few miles before home, the roads are fairly clear, you want to clear your mind and enjoy yourself. What is the Vanquish like? Well, let's find out. other way of describing it. The Vanquish is nothing short of absolutely magnificent. Now, as you can probably tell, today is not the best day for testing a car like this, certainly not in terms of dynamics, but I have actually recently driven one of these in the bone dry, so I can confirm that it really is that good. And it sounds like this. Power is smooth, progressive, it's really punchy, and the carbon ceramics are really nice to use. They feel just like steels and are far better calibrated than in the early DBS, the one after this. For some reason, Aston took a great leap backwards with their brakes. I'm really not quite sure why, but they did. It just lunges forward towards the horizon. It doesn't really throw you back in your seat, certainly not with rain coming down, but it's got ample performance. And best of all, it really does work with the road. You flow. It doesn't throw you about and shake you around, and it behaves exactly like an Aston really should. In fact, it feels to me somewhat more supple than the early DB9s. Aston actually learned what suspension should be, and they kind of stuck with it. This is a really well set up car. The suspension strikes that really perfect balance between comfort and dynamic ability. And if you want a little bit more of the latter, of course, you can press a button down here and the car will happily oblige. But with these rain-soaked roads, you don't need anything more than the standard mode. And gear shifts are reasonably crisp. They're not lightning fast as you'll get in a dual clutch or even a very aggressive single clutch, but they suit the character of this car really well. I know that at the moment everybody's talking about the manual DBS like they've never heard of it before and it's some undiscovered gem. The fact is, I remember what happened with manual DBS prices. When the car was new, we were in the middle of a global financial crisis, so Aston couldn't shift the things. Then after a few years, everyone realised that actually a big, naturally aspirated front-engine V12 Aston with a manual box was the sort of thing they'd probably like to have in their garage, especially when James Bond made a mess of his and yet still looked cool in it. So prices started to go up again. And then everyone realised that actually it does look a bit like every other Aston, and the DBS is quite firm as well, so prices have slowly started to go down again. Now, a few famous YouTubers have gone and bought one lately, and they're acting like they're going to be some magic appreciating asset. Well, the truth is, I'm just not convinced of that. Are they a good car to buy? Yes, definitely. Are they drop-dead gorgeous? Certainly. But in reality, is this a better car? Yes, it is. I think it's not just a little bit better, it's much better. I know a lot of people are gonna overlook it instantly because it isn't available with a stick, but the honest truth is that the DBS manual was never brilliant anyway. It's in a weird position, the clutch is slightly strange to use, and for this kind of car, this is the right gearbox. It just is. I also happen to think that the Vanquish is a real looker. Not so much a fan of the Vanquish S. I think it was a touch too try-hard, and they started doing crazy things with the stitching on the interior. This, for me, is the sweet spot. A 2014 onwards regular car with the 8-speed in it. And if you want a bargain, the earlier cars are available from 60-odd thousand pounds now. It's a huge amount of car for not a lot of cash. And if you buy wisely, they tend to be pretty reliable too. Just beware, because carbon body panels, not very cheap to replace.